thank you for having me here tonight. I've come all the way from Hull, and it's a pleasure to come down and just really share the information that I've got. A bit of background about myself. I've only really been speaking about this since 2012, 2013, even though I've been campaigning since 2004. And the reason for that is because my children were nearly fingerprinted in school when they were 5 and 6 years old, back in 2004, and I just thought that was completely inappropriate for children that age to be fingerprinted to get a library book out. So I campaigned with other parents and privacy groups, and we lobbied Parliament, and well, you'll see what happens in the presentation. But when you're campaigning for privacy and sort of a choice in privacy, I'm a quite private person, and the campaign came to a finish in 2012, and all the other people that were campaigning sort of to get biometrics in schools, at least with parental consent, all sort of thought, okay, we've done the job now, we'll go off, and they all went off and sort of went and campaigned about other stuff and went back to a normal life, I suppose. And I was sort of sat there thinking, hang on a minute, what happens if schools don't adhere to what they're now meant to be doing in the legislation? And so, I mean, previously, when there had been requests from media, I was like number last on the list because I didn't want to do any media, I didn't want to talk to the press, I didn't want to do any television because I was private, and this is what I was, had dear to my heart. So yes, in 2012, we got some legislation passed. And I say everybody else sort of dispersed and left me sort of twiddling my thumbs thinking, well, hang on, we better make sure that this sort of legislation happens. So one of the parents that I was in touch with in Manchester, I was on the phone to, and she said, you need to go out and talk about this and do some interviews. And I was like, I can't do that, I'm very private. Just, no, you need to do it. And so about 2 months later, I then had a telephone call from, I don't know if any of you have heard of Catherine Outbreck. She campaigns in the USA with RFID chips, and she invited me to do an hour segment on her show in the United States that went out coast to coast. And I was just like a quivering wreck. But I thought, if I can do this hour show, it'll be a really good sort of step in the ocean. So I'm not terribly comfortable at speaking. I'm getting a lot more used to it now. So that's sort of my brief history of how I've got to sort of get here tonight to talk to you. So I'm going to talk for probably about an hour and a half, probably. But I'd like to have it like on an informal basis. So if there's anything anybody wants to stop and just ask me a quick question about as I'm talking, I'm quite happy to do that, as long as it doesn't sort of go into a 10-minute sort of discussion. So yes, do feel free to sort of chip in and ask any questions if you want to. So I have a website called State of Surveillance, which is basically SOS, and it is sort of through looking at the biometrics in schools and the sort of data collection that happens in schools. We weren't experiencing that as a sort of adult society, so I now sort of look at what's happening in schools with biometric data, the data they're collecting from kids, who they're sharing it with, and then in a wider sort of societal look, because I have email alerts that come in with fingerprints, iris scans, infrared facial scans, and so I tended to get a lot of stuff that was coming in from what was happening in adult society, and so this is a sort of talk about what happens in schools, and then sort of further step on and how it's going to impact on us, and which it is doing. So, I mean, I teach music for a living, so when biometric technology came into my life, I really had no idea what it was about. But basically, bio means life, and metric means measure. And sort of primarily the biometric that was being used in schools back in 2004, which had only been used for 3 years in schools prior to that, was fingerprint. So schools were buying sort of credit card sized fingerprint systems with the little sort of thumbprint hole where the children just had to walk into the library, put their thumb on the fingerprint scanner, go and get the library book, scan it, thumbprint, and off they trotted. And it just meant that somebody didn't have to be in the library to take their cards. And I just thought at the time when when I saw this fingerprint scanner in the library, because we weren't told about it, I happened to be on the PTA, and as these coincidence things happen, I'd been on the internet a couple of weeks earlier and read an article about fingerprint scanners in school libraries and sort of seen this photograph attached to the article of this fingerprint scanner. I just thought, that's never going to catch on. Who on earth is going to think that's good technology to use with kids? But anyway, 2 weeks later, I saw the exact same scanner in the school, and I thought, So I asked the head teacher, I said, when are you going to ask for my permission to fingerprint my kids? Because I'm not going to give it. And she just sort of stood there and said, I don't need your permission to take your kid's fingerprint. So that was the start of that. And anyway, going on, these are different types of biometrics that have been used in schools. This is an infrared palm scan. So this wasn't prolifically used in schools in the past 10 years, but a company called Fujitsu, that is based in Japan, were developing this technology around about 2005, 2006, and they worked with a company called AMEY, A-M-E-Y, that have the biggest PFI contract in Europe to deliver education to the schools in the Glasgow area. They worked with Fujitsu to introduce this particular technology into a primary school in Renfrewshire so that the school kids there could eat. It wasn't happening anywhere else in the country, and it was absolutely, I'm convinced it was a trial, because it went in the school, it was in the school for a few terms, and then it came back out again. Iris scans were used in Newcastle in 2007, I think. This is another example of the industry testing technology in schools with the kids, and parents didn't know about it because they didn't have to tell them about it. That again was pulled because the lunch lines were taking too long to go through. Facial recognition is the most insidious form of biometric because you don't know you're participating particularly with the system, whereas with a fingerprint or an iris scan you have to get up and participate with the technology. But with this, you don't have to. And in 2010, we had 10 schools in Hertfordshire, Northamptonshire and Cambridge area that at the cost of £9,000 per school, so that's £90,000 of taxpayers' money, went to pay for facial recognition technology so that children wouldn't be late for school. Though how having your face scanned in the morning stops you from being late, I don't quite know. So this is voice recognition technology, and they were looking at introducing this in Irish schools, Republic of Irish schools, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, as far as I can tell. I can't see any evidence to suggest that they've actually brought this in, but certainly the bank that I bank with, I was online yesterday, and they offered me, would you like to, use now voice recognition? I was like, no, I'd rather have my password. So this measures the vibration and hertz that your voice is, but it also measures the inflections and the accents. This is used with telephone banking, and so I think Barclays in the UK use it for the high-end accounts. I know the Department of Defence in America uses it to double check that the people on the computer systems are still who they are all the time. So it's measuring how you type, your interaction with the mouse, the pressure that you're putting on different keys, and again the sort of language that you use. So it's almost like the voice biometrics, but it's used on a keyboard. And this, as far as I know, isn't being used in schools at the moment or education. These sort of biometrics are used in airports to maybe track somebody, an unknown person, but a person of interest who might walk in a specific way, who might have a coloured hat on, or who is carrying an object. So the system will focus in on a particular aspect of a person and track them. This is actually being rolled out in Glasgow next month behind the CCTV cameras. This will come up later on in the talk. Edinburgh are looking at using soft biometrics behind their HD CCTV cameras. West Midlands thought about putting soft biometric systems behind their CCTV cameras. There are big authorities that are thinking about putting this behind the standard CCTV cameras that we've got. So, and the thing is, pardon me, the way that I find this, like I said, insidious, is because essentially the street furniture for us doesn't change. We still see the same CCTV cameras, but we don't know and aren't aware of what's going on behind it. Because unless you have an alert in your box or email box that brings this sort of information to you, you're really not going to see it as in the mainstream press. You might find the odd article in the Glasgow Herald or the Edinburgh local news, but it's not hitting mainstream media. Surprise. So, way back in 2004, there was about 6 or 7 parents that we were campaigning against biometrics in schools, and a good half of those, or over half, were from the tech industry, because they could understand that having biometrics in school or a fingerprint in school is a really bad idea, because as far as they were concerned, that algorithm or the digital number string that's created from the different points on the fingerprint has to be absolutely secure for the whole of that child's lifetime. Otherwise, their digital identity is compromised. So one of the parents suggested, he says, why don't you keep a blog about it? So I thought, okay, I'll just put it in my own name, because obviously nobody's going to read it because the technology is not going to take on. And so me sort of saying, oh, I'm all private and everything, that's one of the reasons why my website is in my name, is because I just really didn't think that anybody would read it. But I have hits from all over the world. I'm in touch with parents in the States and Australia, where the technology is sort of coming in over there. So I've been keeping that going now since 2004, and there's probably about 80,000 words in it. I wouldn't expect anybody to sit down and read the whole lot, but certainly it's a good resource if you wanted to search for anything with the topic of biometrics in schools. So going back to when the head teacher said to me, I can take your children's fingerprints without telling you about it. And I just thought, that's got to be wrong. How can she do that? Because as any parent knows, you've got to sign for school lunches, school trips, school walks. You know, the school wants permission of you to take photographs, to take video, everything. But yet they can take a children's fingerprint, iris scan, infrared palm scan, you use facial recognition on them, and you don't have to know about it. And the reason being is because the Data Protection Act from 1998 has something called sensitive personal data. If schools want to process any sensitive personal data of your children, they have to take your signature. And of course, as you can see on the list, we've got racial, ethnic origin, political opinions, religious beliefs, whether you're a member of a trade union, physical and mental health, sexual life, and whether or not you've committed an offence. And biometrics isn't on there. Biometrics under different parts of EU, individual state legislation is included in this sort of sensitive personal data. In the UK it's not, which is why we were sort of targeted by the biometric industry to sort of test the technology in schools, because it wasn't happening anywhere else in the world, anywhere else in Europe, but just in the UK. So my first, I'd never read a piece of legislation before, and you have to sort of, it takes some tuning into. But my first thought was, well, hang on a minute, this is out of date, it's 1998, it's only sort of 2004, 6 years away from that. But biometric information needs to be in this part of the Data Protection Act. Schools started fingerprinting children in 2001, fingerprint technology came in, and there was a company called Micro Librarian Systems, MLS, that was introducing libraries with these fingerprint readers. So the people from MLS went to the Information Commissioner, who oversees the Data Protection Act. There was a woman at the time, I think she called Elizabeth Fry. They said, can we use this technology in schools? Would it breach the Data Protection Act? And she sort of rightly said, well, no, it doesn't, because it's not sort of, compromising sensitive personal data. They merrily went ahead and started selling this equipment to schools, but what they were also doing is telling the teachers, you don't have to tell the parents. And this is what, my teacher, the head teacher, was obviously not a data protection expert, but she certainly knew where she stood in how she needed or not needed consent from parents. There were quite a lot of parents that when they were aware their kids were being fingerprinted in school, they sort of kicked off about it. And a lot of parents, in my experience in the school, the primary school I was in, at least 50% of them weren't happy with it. I think 2 of us out of 300 parents said something, and I was the one that continued. And I got sent to Coventry for a good two months from the teachers. There was a distinct, very marked lack of interaction between the teachers and myself, given the fact I was on the PTA as well. They were definitely, apart from the office staff, they were good. But at Morley High School in Leeds, if you didn't get your children fingerprinted, the head teacher there go and sit outside under a shelter and eat sandwiches. And they weren't allowed in the canteen to sit with their friends. They weren't allowed in the school. They had to sit outside and eat their food. In Chester, pupils were told that if they didn't have their fingerprints taken, that they wouldn't get any food. And this happened. Kids were not fed because they didn't want their fingerprints taken. And one child actually went to the head teacher's office and said, can I phone my mum to check I'm all right to do this? And the staff in the head teacher's office actually said, well, yes, we've checked with all the parents, it's okay, which was a complete lie. In London, kids that weren't fingerprinted were made to go to the end of food queues. So they had their food last, weren't allowed to sit with their children. I've just said the last point. The day the school fingerprinted the kids were denied access to speak to parents and were told the parents had agreed. There was one, because I'm on Twitter, there was one instance on Twitter where now we've got some legislation which involves consent with fingerprints in school. The parent hadn't consented, this was only probably about 18 months ago, to the school taking the child's fingerprint. The child also now has a right to have a say, and they hadn't consented. So the school put the child in isolation for 2 days because he hadn't consented, even though his parent and the child were well within the law to do that legislation. And I sort of went onto Twitter and got in touch with his parent and said, you at least need to demand an apology from the school. And she was in the legal profession, and she just said, no, I don't want to raise my head above the parapet. And this is what parents feel like with schools. They don't want to be a problem for them. And I can tell you, it's not a nice experience, but I think, you've just got to do sometimes what you've got to do. But anyway, so there was myself and maybe about a group of 5 or 6 other parents, and there was Liberty, Noto ID were very keen to back us, because at the time they were sort of campaigning against national ID cards, biometric, and they could see biometric technology in schools as being a way to soften the next generation to accept biometrics. So they were very supportive, Phil Booth and his team. There was a little-known group called Action on Rights for Children, and they sort of gave myself and the other parents a sort of in to lobbying Parliament, because you can't just go down and lobby MPs. It's not how it works. You have to sort of certain routes to go in. So for the 10 years, I mean, I wasn't involved from 2001, but from 2004, 5 to 2011, or those 10 years from 2001, there were 36 questions asked by opposition MPs, and this was when Labour was in power and the Conservative and Lib Dems were in opposition. We had 2 debates, 3 Downing Street petitions raised by parents, and an Ill-a-Day motion which Greg Mulholland put down, who's an MP from Leeds. So there was some activity, but it never really got much publicity. We lobbied Parliament I did really actively from 2005 to 2010. During the course of that period, we gave the Labour Department of Education, lots of freedom of information requests, how many children had been fingerprinted, how many schools were using fingerprint systems or biometric systems, how had they been tested, how secure was it, where had the technology come from? Well, the technology had come from the military-industrial complex. There's one company called Very Cool Systems. They are big in Cambridge, and their particular system has come from the technology that was supplied to Guantanamo Bay. So this is where it's coming from. So we lobbied Parliament, which was an experience because the Labour government wouldn't speak to us at all. They basically were towing the line that schools weren't breaking any laws or legislation because they weren't breaking the Data Protection Act, and they didn't know about how many schools were using the technology or whether it was safe or not, because that wasn't really up to them, that was the school's responsibility. So we had to try and send out hundreds and hundreds of freedom of information requests to schools to see how many schools were using it, what type of technology they were using, and then we quickly found out the schools didn't answer freedom of information requests very well. So what should be a pretty straightforward process of sending a freedom of information request to school and then replying to became sending lots of freedom of information requests out to school and then chasing them all up, and then it was a real problem. But anyway, we managed to get some good concrete information, and the opposition MPs at that time, Nick Gibb, Greg Mulholland, Sarah Tether, started to ask those questions in Parliament. And they sort of said, you know, if we get into Parliament in 2010, we will pass some legislation and make it fair so that at least consent is gained from parents. And so, given the due, they did. There was a Protection of Freedoms bill that went through Parliament in 2011. And myself and Terry Doughty, who worked for Action on Rights for Children, we advised the Bill Committee. I mean, she was living in London. We sort of wrote lots of reports together. We got information from all over Europe. We had the European MPs, MEPs, doing lots of work for us to find out what's happening in other countries, which there was nothing. We were the only one in Europe, apart from, I think, there was one international school in Sweden that was using biometrics. And it was difficult to give some concrete information to MPs about how prolific the technology was because of the way the schools weren't adhering to the Freedom of Information Act, which as a process, actually, we managed to get the Information Commissioner's Office, who oversees the Freedom of Information Act, to remind schools of their obligation of it. So, but anyway, in 2012, the Protection of Freedoms Act was passed, and in Chapter 2, we got 3 clauses, basically saying that each parent of the child should be notified that they're able to object to the school using biometric data and for their kid to be part of the system. Not all schools do that. They sort of just say, we use a biometric system, here's a consent form, but they should be told that they are able to object. And if they're able to object, that the school has to, by law, provide an alternative, like a PIN or a swipe card. But again, schools don't always do this. And I'm, at the moment, conducting another big survey to see how schools are communicating with parents on this, Protection of Freedoms Act bill. At least one parent must consent, and no parent has withdrawn consent. So if one parent consents and another parent doesn't consent, the non-consent overrides consent, which is great. And also, as well, if both parents consent and the child doesn't consent, the child's non-consent overrides the parent's consent. So actually, the legislation is weighed quite heavily in I think it's quite fair that, you know, if you don't want to consent, you don't have to consent. No consent overrides non-consent, which is good. And this is the first legislation globally on a national level that deals with biometrics and under 18-year-olds. So that's good, but we were the first country globally to be doing it, so it's good that we've got some legislation through. So now, as of 2013, September, this became enacted, and schools should be telling parents that they've got the right to object. They should also be telling children they've got the right to object, but they don't. So this was just a brief summary of what biometrics have been used in children during the years. So we had fingerprinting starting in 2001, infrared palm scans 2006, iris scans 2007, facial scanning 2010, and in the USA they were a bit behind us, but they started fingerprint and palm scanning in 2005, facial scanning, primary schools every sort of 60 seconds on an iPad, but that's another story, and then facial recognition school entry. In Australia there was last year, or the year before last, there was a compulsory fingerprinting for registration, and I was in touch with the Green Party over there about that. A magazine in Saudi Arabia, they said that biometrics and CCTV in schools were a form of supervision to install a sense of discipline, to track children, to make them respect regulations, and to get better productivity. And I thought, do you know what, that's more honest than I've had for the past 10 years from any sort of media or comment from politicians. So this was Florida. In Florida, a bus company decided that they were going to do iris scanning on pupils to check that they got on the bus okay, and then they could send a text message to the parents and say, yeah, your pupil's on the bus. They scanned, I think, about 700 kids, and they forgot to tell the parents, and the parents went ballistic. The senator there put, it only took us, I think, about 8 months to go through the particular Senate, and they completely banned any take of biometrics in Florida, so that was good, and I was in touch with the senator over there. She was lovely. So how many kids have been fingerprinted? Big Brother Watch, I don't know if you're aware of this, but they're an organisation basically born out of the Conservative Party, and they are a voice for privacy if any of the big broadsheets or mainstream media want to get a measured view on how privacy has been attacked in the UK, they go to Big Brother Watch. They did a freedom of information request to 3,218 schools, and they only got replies from 1,255, which I'm not surprised about, because if you were a school and you got a freedom of information request from an organisation called Big Brother asking if you were fingerprinting your kids, you probably wouldn't want to reply if you were. So I don't think this is a very accurate response that 40% of the secondary school population were fingerprinted, because when we did some research nearly 10 years prior, we thought it was around about that then. When I did some research in 2010 for the Protection of Freedoms Bill Committee, I sent a load of freedom of information requests to Liverpool, to all the secondary schools in Liverpool, and I only got a 47% response rate, indicating that only 25% of the schools in Liverpool were using fingerprint systems. When I rang around the remaining schools that hadn't replied, that jump went up to 72% of secondary schools that are using biometrics. So I know for a fact that the information that Big Brother Watch put out was massively incorrect. But of course, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, they all picked up, oh, there's only 40% of school kids. No, there's not. I think probably about 87% of school children, as they go through school, have some experience of biometrics, whether it be in a library system, a canteen system, a school locker system, because you can use it to open your lockers, or a registration system. Biometric data in the form of the sort of number string, the algorithm that's created from the salient points on whatever biometric you've given, can be passed from school to security agencies without you knowing about it and without your kid knowing about it. And this came about in May 2007, where I think there was a select committee's inquiry into a surveillance state, and David Smith, who was a deputy commissioner at the time, information commissioner, went to give evidence, and he was asked, can police access the school fingerprint database? And he said, basically, yes, the police can make an access, and the school would look at, would we breach the Data Protection Act if we respond to the police? And he went on to say that they can give that information, biometric information, without breaking the Act, and a low-level crime would justify that. The school would not have to inform the parent or child, although we would recommend as part of good data protection practice that they do notify people, unless doing so would essentially be a tip-off which would harm the police investigation. And that was literally as much as there was in this massive inquiry into a surveillance state. And we picked up on it and thought, oh my goodness, the police can get fingerprints from schools, or the fingerprint data. When we thought, I wonder if they've done that. And we did think as a group of parents that we might send all the police forces, the Freedom of Information Act, to see if they had. And then we sort of second thought, well, actually, if we do that, we're going to give them heads up that they can. And the chances are they've probably not seen this bit in the report. So we decided not to at the time. This must have been way back in 2004, maybe even 2003, from Microsoft. He's the chief architect of identity and access, Kim Cameron. At the time, he had a very prolific, and he had said about using fingerprints in schools. I had not understood that the fingerprint templates were a reliable, unique identifier, reusable across databases and even across template schemes, which means you can have two separate biometric standalone databases using different systems and creating different algorithms, but they have what they call interoperable programs that enable an algorithm from here to present itself on this system in a similar format and be read the same, and then vice versa. This came about from different states in America having different identifiable biometric systems. So if a felon went over the state line, this biometric system wouldn't talk to this biometric system. So I think it's NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the States, created little programs that would enable these biometric systems to talk to each other. So this is what he's saying. So even if a school biometric system isn't using the same one as Ident1, which I think is supplied by, it's a big military industrial complex company anyway. It doesn't matter because they've got programs that will enable these systems to talk to each other. So I thought, because obviously everybody else at this point, all the other parents and privacy groups, weren't sort of looking at this anymore, and I thought, I just wonder if all the police forces have. So I thought, I'm going to send them a freedom of information request. Out of the 48 that I sent, 4 forces didn't even bother to reply. 2 forces said they had no information on whether or not they'd got biometric data from schools. 4 forces stated they had not accessed the school biometric database. So those forces obviously had more information on that than the 2 forces that said they had no information. Remaining 38 forces refused to answer me, citing cost. Freedom of Information Act, there's a section that enables them to be exempt if it costs more than £450 or 18 hours of work. What I think probably happened was that ACPO, at the time, the Association of Chief Police Officers, probably got wind that this freedom of information request had come out, and if they'd have said, yes, we have access to school database, and yes, there has been a conviction because of this, or yes, or, you know, then that would have been the technology in schools completely dead in the water, because I would have gone to the papers, and I know journalists that would have printed that, and that would have been it. But if they'd have said no, then the question would be, why the hell not? Why haven't you got 9 million kids' fingerprints? You've got these databases. Why are you not accessing it? And I think they probably realised that we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. And so they just said, nope, too much, too much. So I actually rang one of the forces and said, how can you not give me this information? I think it was one of the 2 forces that had answered. And they said, oh, we don't have a field on the database that says fingerprint. Every scrap of data about a child goes onto the National Pupil Database. The schools know it's a school census. That all their educational progress, whatever each term and each year, it's their height, weight, maybe what they eat. I know somebody said over there, and maybe, I don't know if that sort of data goes on. So special educational needs, whether they've got absences, reason for absence, or the way that walk to school, how they get to school, all this. And so this goal goes onto what's called the National Pupil Database. And it's been going on since 2000. If you were 19 in 2000 and you were still in education, your data would still now be on that database because they never delete data off it. It's got over 20 million records on, and it's even now, I think only recently, we're to 2-year-olds in nursery schools that get offsetted to have early learning goals, and that's put on the database. So if you're in education from the age of 2 to 19, the government's got all that data on you, all that data about how you educationally progress, your absence, your illnesses, your special needs, your height, your weight, all sorts of data on you. So it's the most rich data set globally on children. And the government, or the Department of Education, thought it would be a good idea to open this data set up free for research from 2012. She just asked, what about kids that are homeschooled? Children that are homeschooled aren't on the database. My children went to primary school up to the age of 11. Because I'd learned so much about the education system, we then decided to homeschool. So we took them out of the education system. They went back in at 16, 17 to sixth form, but they didn't go to high school at all. So, and that was the best thing we ever did. And if you've got the chance If anybody, tell your children, your grandchildren, if anybody has a chance to have educate, I have to say it was the best thing we ever did as a family. So it was just amazing. So, National Pupil Database, it has names, addresses, dates of birth, really raw data, looked after status, in need status, ethnicity, sensitive personal data, language, special educational needs, and all the pupils' test and exam results and prior attainments and progression at each key stage and term. As of September 2016, I don't know if anybody's read about this in the papers, but as of this last September, the country of birth and main language spoken was meant to be collected from children. And myself and Jen Pearson, who's another mum that runs this database, well, Jen actually has done the vast majority of work on this, so I'm giving you this information, and really she's done the research. Jen had got some freedom of information requests in with the Department of Education about the National Pupil Database and who they were sharing data with, and she rang me and said, look, Pip, I've got 4 freedom of information requests in, and I think if I put another one in, they're likely to refuse me because I've asked too much information. Will you put a freedom of information request in about whether or not the Department of Education is sharing its data with the Home Office and Police? At the end of every year, the Department for Education releases a list of all the bodies that they've shared data with from the National Pupil Database, whether it be universities, educational technical companies, journalists, the Home Office and the police. I said, yeah, okay, I'll send that off. The Department of Education came back and said, yeah, we quite happily share information with the Home Office and the police for immigration purposes and da-da-da-da-da. And so this got picked up by Caroline Lucas and Greg Mulholland in the House of Commons. They asked questions, and it turned out that the Department of Education has been sharing this data, and this is what we sort of go back to. Why am I concerned about it? Because this data can get shared horizontally across different departments, possibly out the country, who knows? I mean, this is only stuff that I know. I'm sure the data is getting shared probably more than what I'm talking about. But anyway, it sparked a debate in the House of Lords at the end of October, and as of, well, I think it's this week, the new census has to be uploaded. So every term schools update the National Pupil Database. They don't have to put country of birth and main language in now because of the work that Jen did primarily, and she highlighted it. And there's a consensus really by government and Department of Education that they've gone about it the wrong way, and they really shouldn't. Because if you remember, after Brexit happened, there was something mooted by an MP that said, we should take the country of birth and origin of all the employees, and everyone said, no, that's a really bad idea. But yeah, let's do it with the kids, and then let's use that information to see if whether parents are illegal immigrants or not. So anyway, I don't think they're sort of going to do that now. So the use of biometrics on us. Unless we participate in opening our computers with a fingerprint, or maybe using facial recognition, or with a smartphone or fingerprint recognition, something that we've chosen to interact with, then as far as I know, as far as you know, there's no other biometric technology that you're participating with. And so in November 2014, the Commons Select Committee on Science and Technologies decided to do an inquiry into the current and future use of biometric data and technologies. And when these committees do inquiries, anybody can submit a submission. So the submission is going from academics, businesses, privacy experts, concerned individuals. And so I put a submission in, and I think there was about 20 of us that put submissions in. So when these select committees, they have maybe a 3-month window for submissions to be submitted. They're only small, about 2,000 words, including citations. So they need to be pretty precise. And then they pick as many people as they feel the need to come and give evidence to the inquiry. So you might get 12 MPs that are on the select committee, science and select committee's inquiry, and then a row of maybe 6 experts. And actually, I mean, I quite enjoyed watching it because on the Parliament television they have it all. And so the Biometrics Commissioner submitted a submission, the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, the Association of Chief Police Officers, the Home Office, different technology companies, different professors. I think Big Brother Watch submitted an inquiry, submitted a submission to an inquiry. And so the Science and Technology Commission was looking at the ways that biometric data is being used and the possible ways it could be used. So this is the Biometrics Commissioner. Actually, it's not a very good photograph. There's not many photographs of him on the internet. This is from a BBC website. It's called Alison McGregor. really, really decent guy. He's a QC, and his sense of fairness and how, privacy with biometrics, and it was very good. He was created in the Protection of Freedoms Act, which is where we got the fingerprint clauses, and his remit was to look at DNA retention by the police and Home Office and fingerprint retention. So he wasn't looking at anything else, iris scans, facial recognition. It was just specifically those two forms of biometrics. But what he found out was, in the course of him looking at DNA and fingerprints, was that the police were using custody suite photographs on a national level to run through a facial recognition software. And in the Home Office's submission to the Select Committee's inquiry, and in the ACPO, which is Association of Chief Police Officers' submission, neither of them had mentioned that they were using facial recognition technology, which is a huge step forwards, because no other government department was using facial recognition technology in the UK at all, and really no companies that were using it, and certainly schools had tried to use it in 2010 and it hadn't been very effective. So we didn't know what companies were supplying the Home Office and the police with this technology, how effective it was. Anyway, he blew the whistle, and the Home Office were told by the Select Committee under no uncertain terms they had to put another submission in, including the fact they were using fingerprints. This is the reaction of Andrew Miller, MP. It says, as we struggle to remember even more passwords and PIN numbers in everyday life, the potential benefits of using biometric technologies to verify identities are obvious. However, biometrics also introduce risks and raise important ethical and legal questions relating to privacy and autonomy. So that's good that he's raising that point. However, kids have been using this technology since 2001, and this is 2014. So they're a bit behind the game, really. We're not against the police using biometric technologies like facial recognition software to combat crime and terrorism, but we were alarmed to discover that the police have begun uploading custody photographs of people to the Police National Database and using facial recognition software without any regulatory oversight, and some of these people have not even been charged. So I sent the Home Office and the police various information requests, and I wanted to know how many people had been identified, how many people were on the database, what were the rates of false negatives, which means they haven't identified somebody when they should, or a false positive, saying this is this somebody when actually it wasn't. The police had absolutely no info, and the Home Office said, well, we don't know what the false negatives and false positives are. We don't know how many people are on the database. We don't know how many innocent people are on the database. So how can you possibly evaluate and spend money on a facial recognition system when you have no idea how effective it is? To what possible use can you use technology like that and use it to any great effect when you have no idea if the data that you're looking at is accurate? I got some questions asked in the House of Lords by, I'm sort of working with loosely now, Lord Scriven, Paul Scriven, who's Lib Dem peer. And the Home Office were told by the Select Committee, you must get a report together by early 2015 on the use of the Home Office's use of biometrics, including the police's use of biometrics. And given his due, the Lib Dems, Lord Greg Mulholland and Lord Scriven have been pumping questions to the Home Office, every 2 months, where's this report, where's this report, where's this report? And the latest round of questions Paul Scriven gave in the House of Lords, we got this answer back from Baroness Williams, review and use of retention of custody photographs with regards to facial recognition and how such images are used. We plan to publish the review shortly. And this is what we've had now for 2 years. This is 2 years after they were instructed to give a report on facial recognition technology and after they omitted it from their original report. So they're not being at all transparent. So how else is it being used? So we have facial recognition technology being used in the custody suite in Leicestershire Police Force. And this turned out, this came about in sort of late spring, early summer 2014, just before the inquiry into current and future uses of biometrics technologies. So I sent a FOIA to Leicestershire Police and said, what are your false negatives? How much did the system cost? What companies are providing it? Da, da, da. And they actually sort of got back to me and said, we don't have any false negatives. We don't have a privacy impact assessment, which is something that you definitely need under the Data Protection Act when you're using invasive technologies. So they're basically using it without saying it was proportionate to use it. So one of the questions I asked them, are you running it in real time? So is it running behind CCTV cameras? And if so, is it facial detection, like the soft biometrics I mentioned earlier, where you can latch on to somebody's characteristic, like how they walk or what colour cap they've got on? Or is it an identifying, so facial recognition? So the CCTV or the facial recognition can say, yes, this is Pippa King or this is John Smith. And they said, no, we're definitely not using it in real-time facial recognition. So about less than a month later, the police have this magazine called The Police Oracle. And the police, you have to subscribe to The Police Oracle, and it's basically the police talking to themselves about how good they are and what's happening. And so I subscribed to it, and I've subscribed under my own name. I don't care if they know I'm doing it. And there was an article in there that said, Leicestershire Police to run real-time facial recognition system at Download Music Festival. And I thought, they've just told me they weren't going to do this. So I tweeted it, and of course, nobody really reads my tweets. So I have a friend at the Register that's a journalist there, and so I said, did you know this is happening? So he wrote this article, and so what was happening was that there was over 100,000 people at the festival, and in order for them to buy a ticket, they had to submit a photograph. They weren't told that this photograph was going to be used on a facial recognition system. They just got told they had to submit a photograph. And so he wrote this piece, and it turned up, and it went viral. It went in the ITN, and it got some good national coverage. In fact, in the end, Leicestershire Police apologised and said that they shouldn't have really done this without telling anybody. They got their hands slapped by the biometrics commissioner. And so I asked them, I sent another freedom of information request, because a good way to get data and way to get, or to interact with MPs and I guess media is to get some good data. And the way that you can do that is from using the Freedom of Information Act. So I used the Freedom of Information Act to ask Leicestershire about the real-time facial recognition system. They said that they didn't use. And they told me the product was supplied free of charge. It was built specifically for the event. And I asked about false positives and false negatives, and they said, yeah, we don't have any of that sort of information, because apparently the technology they were trialling, which was from NEC, Nippon Electrical Company from Japan, and the NEC corporation supply Leicestershire Police with their facial recognition system that they use in-house on their custody suite photographs, which is different to the real-time one. But NEC supplied the real-time one. But the Leicestershire Police had no idea whether or not it was effective, because they basically came and tested it on the party goers at Download Festival and didn't even give Leicestershire Police whether or not it was effective or not. So again, the British public being used by a biometrics company, technologies company, to see whether or not this works. And the crime at Download fell to a three-year low. With over 100,000 people, only 60 crimes were reported. And I think the year prior to that, there was only 72. And the crimes were mainly, the police said, we want to prevent mobile phone theft and the sale of legal highs. But if a high is legal, then why one? Illegal. No, they actually said legal highs. We want to. But it's not difficult to stop your phone from being stolen. Just put it in a pocket with a zip on it. So this cropped up again. So there was such a hoo-ha about Leicestershire Police not being transparent with the public. It cropped up again this later on last year. This was 2015 at Notting Hill. And so the Met Police decided to use facial recognition behind CCTV. The Evening Standard, I think the Independent, ITV and the Telegraph all reported that Notting Hill were using super recognisers. So the Met Police have what they call super recognisers. These are human beings that have been trained to have really good facial recognition skills. And then underneath it will say, like in this headline, backed up by face scan cameras to spot criminals. So the main headline was about these superhuman, recognisers. And then in halfway down the article, and actually we're going to run lifetime facial recognition, which is only the second time it's ever been used. And it's the first time we've ever said we're going to do it publicly. But that was never really picked up on. So I sent them at police an freedom of information request that I only got back just before Christmas this year. They were less forthcoming with information. Leicestershire Police were very good. They were told me about how much it cost them, the company that was supplying it, but the Met Police weren't. They weren't going to tell me the quantity of images that they ran through it, or the quantity of cameras that were running it. They weren't going to tell me the company that was supplying it. They weren't going to tell me the cost of the system. Was it used in real time? They weren't going to tell me that. All we knew it was running, so it could have been done retrospectively. They weren't going to tell me whether the police body cams, because I don't know if you know, in London you've got one of the biggest body camera rollouts globally. I think there's 30,000 just been purchased over the past year or so. whether or not it was used behind that, and we know there's no privacy impact assessment. And I asked what the criteria was to determine whether or not, what is the criteria to determine whether or not you're going to use a facial recognition system and not really tell people that it's going on and that you haven't got a privacy impact assessment for. And they said the criteria used to determine whether a facial recognition system, such as the one used at Notting Hill, is deployed at events for use in the general public. He said there's no criteria. Sorry, that should say no. There is no criteria. So they don't have they just think, I don't know how they decide whether or not to use facial recognition behind CCTV, because there is no criteria. It's unregulated. Not that I think it should be regulated. I don't particularly think it should be used, or if it is going to be used, we need to have a pretty big societal debate about, is that the way we want society to go? So the current state of play with facial recognition in police using it is that Cognitech, which is a Canadian company, supply the police national database, which is all the custody suite photographs from every single police force uploaded to a big national database. I think we said it was 19.1. We get different figures from the Home Office. We've had different FOIAs that say there's only 13 million, and then it'll go up to 19 million after the next year, then it'll go down to 18 million, and then... So I don't think they probably actually really know how many photographs are on there, but we do know that some are duplicates, and that there are photographs of people on that database that have been arrested, that then haven't been charged with a crime and been let free, or been charged with a crime and been found innocent. And so there are innocent people's photographs on the database, and they're not being cleared off it. And the reason why we got the Biometrics Commissioner was because that act really clamped down on the retention of DNA, 3 months, and fingerprints if you're innocent. And what we're trying to do is trying to get the retention of photographs, because this is now a biometric identifier, or being used as a biometric identifier by the Home Office and the police and different police forces that are thinking about using facial recognition, to have that under the same sort of remit as DNA and fingerprints. We have a smart city in the UK, sort of a designated smart city, which is Glasgow. It got awarded £24 million, I think, let's say 2012, 2013, to make the city smart. And as a consequence, it's upgraded CCTV to HD TV. It's got more mobile cameras. It's got body wardens wearing cameras. I mean, you can see the sort of quantity of cameras that are in Glasgow City. It's got the biggest operations centre in the whole of Europe. It says ID through CCTV. New software will allow faces to be created on the basis of witness statements and photographs, and then matched with CCTV images. So they're going to like photo fits to match, and then they'll run it through the CCTV for police to, so removing the need for police to scan hours of film. The University of Strathclyde, which is based in Glasgow, is working on algorithms to predict crime. So, for example, if there's low lighting in the area, not much footfall, if there's a package that's been left somewhere that's been unattended, or if there's a lot of footfall in particular areas where there shouldn't be, this project is sort of designed to predict danger points within the city. As far as I know, that's not running. Also, as well, I mean, this has nothing to do with facial recognition or CCTV, but they had sensors installed in the homes of elderly people in social housing to sort of monitor energy use. I mean, the whole thing about a smart city is pushing the green agenda. So, oh yeah, nothing about surveillance, it's all about being green. But these sensors, according to, I can't remember the councillor's name, but this is one of the councillors in the council. He was being interviewed, and he said about these particular sensors, they can tell us when they've got up in the morning, what rooms they're using, and manage how warm and how deep the bath is. And that's some sensor. If it knows how warm and how deep your bath is, I'm presuming that's a sensor in the bath somewhere. But what they would want to do with that information, I don't know. I mean, what a use of it to know how warm and deep the bath is? I guess on an energy level it would be, but then you can get that sort of data from, I guess, an energy meter. You don't need to particularly know that the bath level is like that, or whether the kettle is like that, but if you've got a smart house, that's the sort of data it's taking. They also brought a system called Suspect Search, which was supplied by a company called NICE. It's an Israeli security system, basically. They've not got a great track record. They supply security systems in Kurdistan and Kazakhstan. Their governments have a bad track record of abusing the type of security systems that NICE have supplied them. NICE supply them anyway. So Glasgow bought a system off NICE called called Suspect Search, which was planned to be run behind the CCTV from April 2015. And it got delayed and delayed and delayed. And I had a Freedom of Information request back earlier this month saying, well, actually, we're planning on turning it on next month, so February 2017. So Suspect Search is a soft biometric detection program. So it's not identifying you as an individual, but it's identifying you as a person of interest. And this is NICE's PR video on the system that Glasgow have bought.
If you need to locate the owner of this unattended baggage, you'd best hope it's not here. If this child were lost, it would be easy to find him here. But what if it was here? Or here? Or here? These are situations in which locating your target within minutes is essential. With Nice Suspect Search, the next generation video search and track application, you can do it easily. Instead of watching hours of video, it presents you with the relevant images, so you can run the search across a vast number of security cameras and locations to find a person of interest within minutes and automatically track their route on a map. Enhancing situational awareness, enabling immediate response, and expediting forensic searches, Nice Suspect Search can help you reduce your search time from hours to minutes. Nice Suspect Search, when time is of the essence.
So that's what's due to be turned on next month in Glasgow behind the high-definition CCTV, and that's what Edinburgh's looking to do as well. I mentioned it earlier. If you go to Glasgow Smart Cities YouTube channel, which is called Open Glasgow, there's a really sort of sickening mouth video about a little girl getting lost and them, using this and how everybody's so, it's got that sort of really tingly, nice music behind it that makes everybody feel good. Yeah, and you know what, it's called Suspect Search. The clue's in the name. It's not designed to help find missing people, and it's... Has anybody seen Persons of Interest on Netflix? Okay, the opening sequence to Person of Interest is so like that. And both of those clips are on YouTube, so if you feel the need for it, you can go to YouTube and have a look at the Persons of Interest, which is essentially about artificial intelligence, facial detection, pre-crime detection system in a fictional city. I don't know if it's a fictional city, but it's certainly fictional technology, but it's not that fictional. The wardens in Glasgow have body cameras. Somebody in Glasgow had taken a picture of some community wardens that are designed to sort of find people for dog waste. And they actually have helmets on with 2 CCTV cameras either side. So there's almost like a 360 view. Now, apart from anything else, and this is a completely different topic, what must that be doing to their head with the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth that's coming out of it? The Glasgow City Council have also got tracking devices that track noise across the city. So, if there's a car crash or a gunshot, they'll know about it. But wouldn't they know about it anyway? Because somebody would use their phone and ring 999, and you don't need this. This is designed to pick up the noise levels of speech and also whispering. This is what they're attaching to different lampposts, as with the noise detection, all across Glasgow for air pollution to monitor the air pollution. And this essentially looked the same, depending on which angle you're looking at it. So if you were to see one of these boxes on the side of a lamppost or on a street corner, you wouldn't really know whether it was taking the air pollution or tracking the noise. Oh, yes, sorry, I hadn't mentioned it. Yeah. So Edinburgh are due to go HD TV with a big digital upgrade, and they're looking to put the similar sort of software that Glasgow has got but hasn't switched on yet behind their CCTV. Councillor Kame, who is one of the councillors in Glasgow City Council, said the main goal here is to have an integrated CCTV system. For the capital city, we have the Parliament where people come to protest. So he's making no bones about it. This isn't to find lost children or people with dementia. This is to track protesters. It's one of the biggest tourist cities in the UK, and we want safety for people who come here and people who stay here, implying that people that go to protest are not keeping people safe. So I sent them a freedom of information request. I said, because the article is quite prolific, because it's in the Edinburgh News, and I think it was January 2016. And I sent them a freedom of information request, because what they were saying in this article is they plan on putting this facial recognition or facial detection and number plate recognition system on all the south borders. So it's not just going to be in Edinburgh, it's going to come right down the city and across borders. And the council just said, no, I don't have any information on that. So I got in touch with a journalist who wrote the article and said, just had this really weird freedom of information request back from Edinburgh City Council. You've either made this up or they're lying. Anyway, he never got back to me, but I shall definitely send them another freedom of information request, because CID, Cognitech, who supply the Police National Database, is the same company that's looking to supply this, and that Cognitech have also got the contract to upgrade Edinburgh's IT, all Edinburgh's IT systems, and I think Glasgow's as well. So you've basically got one massive tech company coming in, taking over the IT in the two main cities in Scotland. I'm not certain whether or not it's got the contract for the police force, but it's certainly got the contract, or getting the contract, or they're looking at this big surveillance grid with one company sort of controlling the whole of Scotland. The next step, this is quite concerning. Last August in Wired magazine, there was an article that came out called One Nation Under CCTV, the Future of Automated Surveillance. This is a sort of technology that NICE and CGI are offering Glasgow and Edinburgh. This particular company called Sequester can take it to the next level. They are able to process an enormous amount of data. Their technology is leaps and bounds ahead of, I'm aware, the technology that's being offered the other cities. So much so, that company was started in 2014 as a startup company. I'll just press, by Anglo Scientific, who are a private equities company. So Anglo Scientific have startup companies that are looking to do stuff, and they get investors. So Sequester's had a few £1 million, and they are making claims that they can offer this sort of a technology, very much like the NICE and CGI stuff, but on a far more sophisticated level. And they had an open day last October, like their big official launch. And the guy that had written, the article in the Register about the Leicestershire Police doing the download, got invited. And so I said, I've got to have a look at Sequester. I'd done some research on it. And he hadn't written anything about them, but 24 hours before the opening of the event, Sequester contacted all the journalists and said, you're not allowed to come anymore, we're just de-inviting you. So the only people that were allowed in were other members of industry and other members of different foreign powers that could sort of see what they could do for their country. So Alex went back to Sequester and said, how come you've de-invited us? And they said, well, the Home Office and the Met Police told us not to, because they're trialling what Sequester can do at the moment in London. So the Met Police is working with Sequester. So, and this is, like I say, this is a company that, if you believe what they say on their website, is capable of processing huge amounts of data, which you'd have to do if you're using a system in London. Radio Physics Solutions are another startup company. They were started up in 2008, and they've had a fairly quiet existence. They haven't got anything commercial for a long time, really, because they've been following the development of Manchester Metropolitan University's development, I suppose, of what's called millimetre microwave technology through grants from us, Department of Business, our taxes going to the Department of Business Innovation and Schools, going down to research councils, going through to universities. So these are radio frequencies between 18 and 140 gigahertz. And as it's hitting different densities in the bodies, you're getting this 3D definition. And this is what a TSA scanner does. So the radio frequency solutions he was working on between 75 and 110 gigahertz. So they're working on a technology that will scan crowds for gun-shaped objects. So they've got scanners that look like this, that they're trialling with the Met Police in London. Now, I don't know if anybody's seen anything like this, but if you do, I'd be really interested to find out, and you would know that you're getting dosed up with a gigahertz of 75 to 110 splash of radio frequency that essentially isn't giving the system the images that you've just seen, like the TSA scanners. So what it's doing is it's artificially determining this person has got a gun-shaped object on them. But the scary thing is, bearing in mind Radio Physics Solutions and Sequester are owned by the same equities company, Anglo Scientific. This says here, so it said the solution. Radio Physics Solutions has developed and patented the only device globally that can accurately and cost-effectively screen for concealed threats, e.g. under a person's clothes at large distances up to 40 metres. Sequester is the world leader in software solutions for finding and tracking people in video. Radio Physics Solutions and Sequester means that rather than having a person manually point the RPS, Radio Physics Solutions device, you can have a multiple, e.g. tens or even hundreds, of Radio Physics Solutions sensors in an automated network operating 24/7. Sequester automatically tells the Radio Physics Solutions devices where to point. So the artificial intelligence behind the CCTV alerts the multi-millimetre microwave. There could be a problem here. We've got some crowds that are gathering that shouldn't be there. Those sensors turn around and start scanning the cows without any human intervention at all. Once a person is identified as a threat, Sequester can let the relevant security team know and also track that person through any CCTV camera so the security services can pinpoint that person and deal with the threat before any intended damage is caused. This can be done cost effectively for mass deployment with no harm to civilians. The RPS, the Radio Physics Solutions sensor, is harmless to humans. I don't know where the evidence suggests that is, but there is none on either side yet. Just going what Sequester is able to do, Sequester is able to make dumb CCTV smart, so it can get CCTV from any system, be it private or public, amalgamate the video, turn it into a format that's similar, and then it essentially amalgamates all the CCTV network into one big one. I think at the moment the public space television and the amount of CCTV without the body cameras that the police has access to and government is only about 6 to 8%. The vast majority of CCTV is private. So for the security services to now have a company that's going to offer them, we can make all these individual systems into one. And at the same point in time, we can work with our partner. And effectively, I mean, you can sort of think, okay, that's great. But that's the end of any sort of revolution, ever. That's us. I sent the Met Police freedom of information requests on what they were doing with the use of radio physics solutions sequester, and they just understandably said, nah, not telling you. That's it. So all that information now is underground, and so unless there's going to be a discussion in Parliament, which is my next sort of, hopefully, step, because the thing is, I don't know what the health implications of this has. Like I've just said, where's it going to stop? Are we going to have these scanners on lampposts? They're going to scan our bags? They're going to scan the cars? They're going to scan the houses? What else are they going to program it to look for? A knife? Maybe, I don't know. We don't know. They're not telling us. And most people don't even know this technology exists. So it's not like we're sort of dealing with something that we've ever experienced before. This is unknown for us. Within that 75 to 110 gigahertz flash is the 95 gigahertz range. This was tested by the American in Iraq to disperse crowd. And basically, when you have 95 gigahertz microwaved at you, it heats up 0.4 of the water beneath your skin, and apparently is absolutely excruciating. So what to do? I don't want to make it depressing for you, because you can be really pesky, and the more of us that know what's happening, hopefully the more transparent they'll be about it. And that's all, I'm all about choice. If somebody wants to get their kids fingerprinted, that's fine. But just at least know the reasons and the arguments, or my arguments. You don't have to believe them. But, I just think that it's all about that, really. So I use Freedom of Information Act loads. So there's a great website called whatdotheyknow.com. So if you want to ask an authority of Freedom of Information Act, you can just double check whether or not somebody else has asked it. So there's lots of public freedom of information requests there, so I put mine on there. Theyworkforyou.com is a great place for you to go. It's basically an easy version of Hansard, which is a complete record of what's going on in Parliament, and it's really easy to search for words like biometric facial recognition, so you can see the chit-chat about what's going on in the Houses of Parliament. And, whether or not you agree with our parliamentary system, it's what we've got, and there are some good people in Parliament. And if you do search on theyworkforyou.com and you find a minister that is sympathetic with something like biometrics or privacy, then I just write to them and say, look, do you know this is happening? And then that's how you get questions. And those are my websites. I'm not really talked about RFID in schools, and somebody was talking to me about Wi-Fi and the issues with Wi-Fi and children and the smart cities. Again, I need any questions, or if I want any questions asked, then you can do. But thank you for having me. Thank you.